Hi, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Voice Notes from a Friend, where I send you a voice note with my thoroughly unqualified thoughts and musings on whatever I feel like, because in spite of my very limited lived experience, I do have thoughts on nearly everything. But today I would like to start us off in good faith by talking about something that I do have quite a lot of experience in, which is being mentally ill. I am kidding, but also kind of not. I feel like I am at a point now where I can joke about my mental health, but for a minute there, the situation was dire. It was no laughing matter. I personally have struggled with my mental health in numerous capacities throughout my whole entire life. I grew up knowing that I had anxiety, and that honestly has followed me up until present day. But through a lot of therapy and many, many years of meds, I feel like I am finally in a mostly better place with my anxiety. But what I didn't realize at that age was that there was more going on upstairs than just anxiety, which is kind of what I brushed it off as for most of my life. We are very, very fortunate to be living in an age where more and more people are getting the diagnoses that they need to live their fullest lives. And there are a ton of people who are being diagnosed later in life, which is great, and I am actually one of those people. I was diagnosed with both ADHD and OCD in my late 20s, and after a lifetime of struggling, finally being able to put a name to those things really changed my life for the better. I recently talked a little bit about my mental health on my social channels, and a lot of people resonated with it. I was very pleasantly surprised by the response. I read through a ton of comments from people saying that they had a similar experience, and I got a lot of questions asking me for more details on some of the things that I said, so I am more than happy to oblige as someone who is very passionate about sharing and oversharing on the internet. So I took to Instagram stories and I asked y'all to ask me anything about ADHD, and you all asked some great questions, so I have a list of my favorites and I'm going to answer them in grave detail. And my hope is that if you are somebody who is struggling with ADHD or wondering if you have ADHD and are feeling a little bit lost, or if you just want to hear from somebody who has a similar lived experience to you, then you will come away with something of value from this video. I know for me personally, hearing about other people's experiences online was hugely helpful for me, both in pushing me to seek a diagnosis for myself and in helping me find ways to make my brain work better for me once I did get that diagnosis. So without further ado, let's get into these questions, shall we? How did you figure out you have ADHD? Just turned 30 and questioning. You sound just like me. So like I said, I didn't personally discover this about myself until well into my 20s, but looking back, like the writing was on the wall the entire time. So as a kid, I was super disorganized. I lost things all the time. My room was always a mess. I actually was a decent student and I could retain information easily, which is why I think people didn't really suspect it at the time. But I spent a lot of time daydreaming. In my spare time as a child, I was a serial hobby hopper. I never really committed to anything. I never really finished a project. I always had multiple creative endeavors going at the time, and as a kid, it's easy to just brush that off as like they're being a creative kid. And so I honestly just kind of thought that was just the way that I was. I feel like a lot of people, including myself, tend to think of ADHD as more of like the hyperactivity symptoms, like fidgeting, talking a lot, interrupting, like stuff like that, and I didn't really have any of that. Like I was definitely a very chatty kid, but my primary symptom was that I just was not very good at completing things. I could never make it past like the ideating stage of a shiny new idea, and once it lost that initial appeal, it was dead to me. But once I got to be an adult is when it really started having an impact on my life, and what really started the wheels turning and making me think that something more was going on and that something was really wrong was a series of failed jobs after I graduated from college. I could never focus at work. I felt like I was chained to my desk. Like sitting at my desk felt like torture to an extent that I knew was not normal. So I was disappearing to go for walks. I was taking suspiciously long bathroom breaks. I was generally struggling to complete my tasks. I would sit down at my desk and this heavy brain fog would just magically materialize every time I looked at my to-do list. And I actually ended up getting fired from a job that I really wanted because of this, which was deeply embarrassing. And for a while, it only reaffirmed my belief that I was just kind of bad at everything. But as a lot of people do, I consume a lot of content. And one day, just by happenstance, I was scrolling through YouTube and a YouTube channel called How to ADHD popped up. And it was a video that was not necessarily like expressly geared toward people with ADHD, so it piqued my interest because at the time I didn't realize that I had it. It was called something like how to do something that should be easy, but it's not. And I had just spent literally years of my life feeling like things that were easy for other people were were like impossible for me. So I clicked on it and I watched the whole thing, and I watched another one, and I watched another one, and I watched another one, and it really got the wheels turning. And after several days of this, I learned so much about ADHD, and I had the absolutely earth-shattering realization that that might have been what was going on all along. Your experience might be different, but honestly, my advice to you would be, if you are feeling like something is wrong, if you're feeling like things are difficult when they shouldn't be, it cannot hurt to seek out a way to talk to somebody and just get a little bit of clarity on what is going on. And even if it doesn't result in getting an ADHD diagnosis, it is still worth trying to seek out help, because life is not supposed to feel that hard. And that brings me to the next question, which is, what was the diagnosis process? What did getting a diagnosis do for you? And how did you know it was time to make it official? Good question. So I am extremely fortunate to have a long-standing and positive relationship with a licensed and wonderful therapist. I actually had started seeing her for what I thought was just anxiety around the time that I was about to get fired from that job. So by the time this thought started clunking around in my head, we had already been meeting for several months. I actually was too embarrassed to bring it up to her as a possibility at the time. I feel like there's a lot of discourse going around about how self-diagnosis is bad and it's illegitimate and blah, blah, blah. And so I kept it to myself for a while because I didn't want to I don't know, I just didn't want to be perceived that way. But then one day, shortly after I was let go from that job, we were talking about all of the reasons that led to me being fired, and she said, "Have you ever thought that maybe you have ADHD?" And I literally felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off of my shoulders. Like, finally, there was affirmation that I was not crazy. I was not alone in thinking this. And maybe there was a legitimate reason that all of this was happening to me, and I was not just broken and irredeemable in some way. So we spent the next several sessions talking about this in more detail. We went over all of my symptoms. We talked a lot about my childhood history and how far back these patterns went. And over time, we confirmed that this was indeed what was at play. And even just having that knowledge about myself was liberating, because suddenly I had this whole new vocabulary to describe what I was experiencing. And I had actual reasons to explain the things about myself that had been frustrating me for decades. And most importantly, once I gained that vocabulary, I unlocked access to a ton of new tools that could help me navigate my life and finally make some positive changes. So that was several years ago now, and I am still working on improving every day, but I have built up a decent little repository of tips and tricks that I can lean on to make life with ADHD a little bit easier. And mercifully, that has granted me the opportunity to finally start succeeding at things that I always thought I would fail at, like holding down a job, running my own business, doing basic everyday things like keeping up on the dishes and vacuuming, etc., etc. So I recently posted a video on my Instagram and TikTok where I talked a little bit about my past difficulties in sustaining effort on content creation specifically. Because while I have been doing this on and off for 10 years, I really only have been giving it my all for just over a year. And that's really because up until very recently, I lacked the toolkit that I needed to manage my ADHD and keep it in check so that I could move toward a single goal continuously. In that video, I briefly mentioned that I now employ some tips and tricks to be able to stick to things long term, and you are all very interested in learning more about that. So let's talk about it in more detail. And keep in mind that I don't really do all of this formally. It's more of just a mental exercise that I run through when I pursue a new idea. But this is also something that I think would be great to put some more structure to in a journal, if that's something that you're into. So here's how I approach creative work now that I know I have ADHD. Number one, I have sort of a mental checklist that I run ideas through before I decide to start pursuing them. And this has been huge for me as somebody who lives for the seductive allure of a shiny new idea. You name it, I've done it. I started my first food blog on a whim 10 years ago and abandoned it multiple times. I started a jewelry making business. I started a crocheting business. I have started so many Instagram accounts. You do not even want to know how many Instagram accounts I have started for businesses that I did not pursue. I started a cookie micro bakery. That one I actually stuck with for more than 5 seconds. It was more 10 to 15 seconds. And I was deadly serious about it. I created branding. I bought stickers. I bought boxes. I bought everything. And I stopped doing it after 2 to 3 weeks. And honestly, this is something that I have done for my entire life. And when I was a kid, it felt pretty harmless. Oh, she's just being creative. She's such a creative kid. She's starting a novel and not finishing it on her family's desktop computer, Do you know? I don't know. Is that a thing that other people did? But as an adult, It's a little less cute, and it has led me to waste a ton of time and money on things that if I had just taken a breather for a sec, I probably would have decided it wasn't worth it to pursue them. Now I have a self-imposed rule where I agree to every new idea with warmth and enthusiasm, but also a healthy dose of skepticism. And here's what I ask myself. Number one, when did I think of this? Is this a dream? What is that quote from The Office? Like, this is a dream that I have been thinking about since this morning, and I am not giving up on it now. That is the story of my life. So if it is a brand new idea, maybe we need to pump the brakes a little bit. Number two, do I already have tools at my disposal that I can use to start dipping my toe in this idea risk-free? Is this something that I can explore on a smaller scale before fully diving in? Again, if it's going to take a ton of time and resources before I can even dive in, once again, pump the brakes. And often this results in a feeling of disappointment. But I always end my line of questioning with, is this idea just trying to fill a void that could be filled with something else I already have access to? Because sometimes all I really want is an opportunity to flex my creative muscles in a new way. And I have tons of avenues to do that that are already at my disposal. So a lot of the time after I have taken a little bit of a breather, maybe I go for a walk and reset my brain and really like mull this idea over before spending $100 on supplies for it on the internet. That little reality check leads me to understand that my existing creative outlets will suffice. And if I sleep on it for a week or two and I am still thinking about it, well, then maybe I will allow myself to dip my toe. But I have stopped going guns blazing into an idea that I just thought of 2 seconds ago. So that's number one. Number two is allowing myself to take breaks from something that I am pursuing and then come back to it later without considering it quitting. When you have ADHD, you probably lose steam on ideas very often. And that can really feel like you're failing. I know I personally put a ton of pressure on myself before I was diagnosed because I knew that if I just stuck with one thing for any meaningful period of time, I could be successful, but I could not get myself to do that. Take my content creation business, for example. I say that I've been doing it for 10 years, but that really has been 10 years of on and off effort. However, that has still moved me in the right direction, and I still am moving towards success. So just by taking breaks, that doesn't mean that you are quitting. It's just putting a pin in it and coming back to it later. So I have removed some of the pressure from myself to sustain constant energy on a thing. But that brings me to number three, which is strengthening my mental muscles to push through hard things. This is honestly the hardest part for me, and it is something that I am still working on because for me, it's not just my ADHD at play. I also have OCD and general anxiety. So I have a very strong tendency to see a little bit of potential discomfort and go running and screaming in the opposite direction. I have a very low tolerance to feeling uncomfortable in any way. Sometimes it makes me very, very anxious, and sometimes it just leads to the feeling that you get with ADHD where you are just so depleted, so low on dopamine, and you need something easy to fill your cup back up again. Like if a task doesn't sound good in that moment, it's going to be very, very hard for me to motivate myself to do it. But the unfortunate reality is, if you are someone like me and you want to build one thing and be successful at it, there are going to be times where you're just going to have to do something that your ADHD really does not want to do. And this is where I think I might lose some people because there really isn't a hack for this. You kind of just have to do the thing. And it is hard, but that's the point. Something I like to tell myself when I am facing down a task that feels impossible is no one is coming to do this for you. You are the only person who can do it. And the more I do this, the stronger those muscles get, and the easier it feels to get past that hump of executive dysfunction where getting started feels like the hardest thing in the world. I will also say that less screen time has been so helpful for me in this regard. There is an inverse relationship between the amount of time I am spending on my phone and my mental health. And that's something I'm still working on, but sometimes I just need to kind of gentle parent myself and say, okay, we're gonna log off, we're gonna put our phone in the other room, we're gonna set a timer, and we're gonna do the thing. Which brings me to my next point. I know that I just said there aren't really any hacks, and I do believe that's true because ultimately you still just have to do whatever it is that you need to do. But there are a couple things that I have found personally helpful to motivate me. And the biggest thing for me has been using a time timer. I live and die by this thing. I use this every single day, especially at work, and I honestly believe that it has prevented me from getting fired again. It's really just a little analog timer. It's like $15. It comes in different colors. Mine is pink. And it's just a little analog timer. And you do like this. And I find it so helpful because it helps me visualize time. It is so easy when you have ADHD to completely lose sight of how much time you are spending scrolling or getting lost on a side quest or whatever. And then all of a sudden it's the end of the day and you have gotten nothing done. Before I got this thing, I was legitimately wasting entire days of my life. They were just soaring past me and I had no conception of how fast time was passing. So now I keep this thing on my desk right in front of me. And when I am feeling overwhelmed by a task, I will start a timer for usually 25 minutes and I will put my phone away and I will monotask on that one single thing until the timer runs out. And then I will allow myself a 5-minute break. This is really just the Pomodoro method, but honestly, this particular timer is just such a game changer. I cannot recommend it enough. I have used my phone for this and it can work if that's all you have. But the visualization of time is super helpful for an ADHD brain. And also, then you are not picking up your phone, getting distracted on the way to the clock app, and then all of a sudden it's been an hour and you don't even remember what you were setting the timer for in the first place. So, highly recommend getting a time timer. And then another thing that I have done is identify ways to reduce friction on tasks that I know are going to take more mental energy. And basically what I mean by that is I selectively cut corners to make things easier for myself. I feel like the best way to illustrate this is through an example. I film a lot of short form cooking content, and there are a lot of steps that I need to follow before I can actually get that done. I need to make sure my kitchen is clean. I need to do my hair and makeup. I need to make sure my phone is charged. And historically, all those little roadblocks have hindered me from making content, and in some cases, extreme cases, they have even led me to quit for extended periods of time because doing the thing just felt too hard. But if you take away some of those little points of friction, then it feels like you're effectively setting the task to easy mode. So maybe instead of making sure the kitchen is totally clean, I just collect the dishes and I put them in the sink where you can't see them. Maybe instead of spending a bunch of time on my hair and makeup, I just put my hair up and I do a 5-minute makeup routine that makes me feel a little bit better, but is so easy I could do it with my eyes closed. Maybe I put phone chargers all over my house, and so then I can plug my phone in wherever I am, and I don't have to worry about my phone being dead when I feel like I am inspired to make a video. This is something that you will have to figure out for yourself, but by working to identify those little points of friction throughout the day where your brain goes, that's just a little bit too hard, you can then set up systems to support you and reduce that feeling so getting started feels easier. And finally, the last thing, a huge part of my ADHD journey has just been arming myself with knowledge. When I first got diagnosed, it felt like such a foreign world to me, so I subscribed to as many free resources as possible to try to get to know myself a little bit better. I already mentioned the How to ADHD channel on YouTube. I highly recommend her videos. And the other one that I can think of is Attitude. I think that it's actually, they do have like a print magazine, but I just subscribe to their free email newsletter. So I read those every morning and they have tons of helpful tips and tricks. They have profiles of people with ADHD so you can learn about like the different types of ADHD. And that has been so helpful for me, especially in managing ADHD at work. Couple more questions. 9-year-old daughter with ADHD, please send pointers. So I feel like I have a difficult time speaking to this because I didn't get diagnosed until much later. But from my perspective, I think that the most important thing that you can be doing for her is what you are already doing, which is getting her a diagnosis so that you can then support her. So many people, especially women and girls, often don't get diagnosed until much later in life, and I feel like it is so much harder to build up the mental muscles needed to deal with ADHD once you are already past childhood and adolescence. So you are setting her up for success by investing in her journey early. Even though I wasn't diagnosed at that age, I still think that my parents saw a lot of what was going on, and they did do their best to support me. So they allowed me to pursue my creative outlets. They gave me structured routines to follow. They tried to help me organize, although once I got to school, the ball was in my court and that shit was at the bottom of my backpack. You know, I still struggled sometimes because I was a kid. I think the most important thing for me was just having a supportive environment where I could be a kid, and they were doing their best to just provide some guardrails for me to try to set me up for success. Just having that support was huge. Okay, and the last question is, do you want Ritalin? I have extra. I am so okay, queen, but thank you so much for the offer. I actually am not on meds for my ADHD. It is something that I have thought about, but it's just not something that I have pursued just yet. I was on an SSRI for my anxiety for my entire childhood and adolescence, so I just am not personally ready to go back on meds at this time. In a lot of cases, I think it can be a really helpful first step to try to clear away some of that mental fog so that doing all of these other things that I'm talking about feels just a little bit easier. So that is all I have on ADHD today. My mouth is so dry. So unbelievably dry. I am going to go drink water now, but if you found this helpful, please do let me know. And if you have additional questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I would love to do a part 2 on this. I would love to talk more about OCD because I honestly think there are so many ways that these things have crossed over for me, and there have been some comorbidities that have made things just a little more difficult. So if you have questions about that, let me know. I'd love to do a video on that. And in any case, if you have made it this far, thank you so much for listening to me yap. I hope that this was helpful for you, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Okay, love you very much. Good chatting. Okay, bye.